ignition. I need a fix. I need to fix my ignition. If you wanna whip me into shape, I need a permanent mission. 'Cause I'm on the run fast, going nowhere. And I love my brain fast. I wanna run fast to where I don't care.
Check, check. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. All right. That's a little bit better. Okay. Well, we can get started. I'm going to be talking a little bit about responsive design utilizing a pattern called mobile first. Just to let everybody know, I've got a copy of Wroblewski's book, which is a mobile first here, that I'll give to anybody that I randomly pick from the Twitter feed. So if you tweet at me during the talk, it's at Sirius_B. I'll randomly pick somebody, and at the end of the talk, I'll give the book away. So just to get that out of the way first. So like I said, I'm Ben Bykowski. I'm a native Clevelander. I've been coming to Stir Trek for several years now. Such a great event, and I'm glad that you're all able to make it here to enjoy the great content that you'll see throughout the day, as well as Avengers: Age of Ultron, which I know I'm looking forward to. And speaking of, I work at a company called Falls Digital. We're an small interactive marketing agency in downtown Cleveland. We're at this lovely building, Terminal Tower, which some of you may recognize as actually where they filmed one of the main scenes in the first Avengers movie. So there's a little scene from that. So it's always good to get out and network with people in the industry. So to begin with, I want to talk about why mobile first. I know that it's probably obvious to some of you, maybe many of you, maybe most of you, that mobile first is a good idea, but maybe not. And so just to kind of get this out of the way, I want to say that this is actually a pretty easy one. At least it is for me, but it may not be for everybody. Maybe not for your stakeholders, your bosses, and people like that. So the reason why is, well, statistics. Now, you can do a Google search for infographics on mobile trends, and there's tons of them. And you go ahead and do this. You'll see. I mean, it's out there. So I mean, it's pretty evident that obviously this whole mobile thing is not going away. So starting there, I mean, I think that's pretty compelling. But I want to share a few statistics with you that also kind of indicate a few things around this trend and its increasing use. So this one comes from Luke's book. Now, Luke's book's a couple years old, so it's probably more than this now, but or like to even more of an extent. But I thought that was pretty staggering. The fact that the device production is outstripping the human population growth. I mean, that's pretty impressive. There's not in this year alone, we're going to have more tablets. Okay, just tablets, not mobile phones, but just tablets themselves will ship than desktop computers. So that, again, another statistic that just sort of shows that this trend is just continuing. The in the past year, desktop usage declined by 15%. In 1 year, 15% drop in that year, and in the same time, mobile and tablet use has nearly doubled. Okay, so again, and that's just in 1 year. So what's to happen in 2016 and beyond? And the thing is, in the past year alone, mobile use is going from counting for 1 in 4 to 1 in 3. So again, I think that this is just kind of painting a pattern for what's happening with mobile. Another thing I think is important is that people move from device to device as they browse the internet increasingly. You start off on your phone, you're looking something up, and if you want to really dig in, maybe you're spending a large chunk of your time on your laptop or on your computer proper, but a lot of times people will start off or end up on another device. And if you're not being consistent with the way that you're presenting your content and making people, giving them the ability to do the same things across these devices, then they're going to have a hard time connecting with you and buying your products and service, converting all of those things. So again, I think that's an important thing to note. This next point here, it comes from, now Amazon, this is a big significant thing for them. Now they measured this, that for every 100 milliseconds, they can increase sales by 1%. Well, to them, that's millions of dollars. But it's not insignificant to the rest of us. If you can do something that decreases the page load by 100 milliseconds, it may seem instantaneous, but you do a few of those and they start to really add up. You start to have a really performant website, and that is just so essential to user experience that's of a high quality. And also, you'll see as we go through this why that's so important for responsive design. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is, when it comes to these design patterns, is designing for constraints. And I think that, we've lived in this age where as broadband came out, it made so many things possible. We could, play, videos, and Flash came out, and it was, oh, we're going to have, desktop experiences online, and that's great. Now, some of you may remember this sound back when I was in high school, and I used to get online and play Doom 2, where you can only play 2 people, over the interwebs. But at the time, I mean, this was the way that a lot of people got online, and because of it, the reality was you just really couldn't have that many large graphics, large files. Pages had to be small, because of the constraint of the web at the time. So I think that broadband has kind of, got us into some bad habits with some of those things, and I'll show why that matters with a story that I want to tell in a minute. And I want to say that, even though Web 2.0 was made possible by it, it's not like it's a bad thing. I think it informs stuff, but I think there's ways that we can do it better. There's ways that we can do it progressively. There's ways that we can, cover a larger group of constituents and not just focus on just one narrow, band of them and then punish everybody else. So I think the mobile web, this really reintroduces this concept. Now, sure, my phone might have a way faster processor than my 486 DX33 that I had in high school with its VGA monitor. But, when I'm out, and not by a Wi-Fi connection, I might be running on a 3G, I might have 2 bars, that's, tantamount to dial-up. So I think that's important. So I want to tell a story about this. Now, this backdrop here, you're going to see in a minute when this animation goes. This was a project that I thought was pretty cool. It was done by, sponsored by NASA, and what they did is they solicited people to send in selfies of themselves from all over the world, and then they aggregated all of those selfies together to create this picture up here. And I want to use this as a way to kind of provide a backdrop for the story I want to tell. And the story is about a project called Feather. A guy by the name of Chris Zacharias worked at YouTube a number of years ago, and he was a web developer there, and they were in the office, and one of the engineers was complaining about how large the video view page on YouTube had gotten. It was over 1.2 meg, and the engineer was saying, like, well, they can write a Quake emulator that's under less than 100K, and we can't keep our page weight down. So Chris took it upon himself to say, you know what, that's a good point. I'm going to see what I can do. And he went and he got, started optimizing the code on the page. He stripped out all the non-essential elements that he could. I think he kept it down to 5 related videos, only 10 comments, that were loaded by Ajax, the video player itself, a couple of like the flag button, a few things. And even doing that, he was still stuck at 250K. It wasn't until he introduced an HTML5 video player that he was able to finally break the 100 kilobyte barrier and get it down to that size. Now, when he did this, he was really excited, and so what they did is they let people opt into Feather. People that were on YouTube, but it's a small part of their traffic, they let them get on and try it out if they wanted to. They wanted to see like how this would perform and what an impact it would have. Because the fact that it was now 1/10 the size of the other pages, they expected to see this big performance. Anybody want to guess what happened? Does page speed go down over the use of this? It actually went up. And this was really shocking to them because they said, well, how in the heck is a page that's 1/10 of the size suddenly, out there, we're looking at statistics and it's taking like 10 minutes to load. Well, this can't be right. I mean, they scratched their heads, and then one of the engineers figured it out. It was geography. Turns out that there are people in remote places of the world, places in sub-Saharan Africa, as far away as Siberia, which I think we went to in the video, where they were accessing the internet, trying to get to YouTube, and they just couldn't use it. They had never used it because it would take hours for them to be able to just watch a video. But with Feather, even though it was so small, they only had to wait like about 10 minutes. That was acceptable to them. So what it showed was that by going and optimizing to this really extreme degree, that they were able to go and reach markets that previously were just completely out of their reach with their implementation that they had. So I think that with that and the things that I just talked about, that there's a history lesson, and that history lesson is something that if you fail to learn it, you're going to repeat it, right? The famous thing. I mean, this is, I think, what is important about the rise of mobile as being now a dominant form of communication and way to access the internet. And that if we can go back and learn and relearn some of the things that we used to take for granted back in the days of dial-up, it'll serve us well as we go forward to design experiences for mobile. So that's great, but I want to talk about how to do that and not just talk about why it's such a great idea. So now, before I get into like, okay, here's all of these tools and all this other stuff, I want to start here because the problem that I have encountered and that I'm sure some of you have encountered is that as you go forth to try to do this, it's sort of you get sort of like these halfway kind of buy-in, like, well, yeah, but we already have a website kind of stuff. And so I want to kind of address a few of those and kind of talk about why they're not a good idea. So make sure that you stay vigilant on those. The first is this idea of having a separate mobile site. So I'll have clients that'll just say, can you just build me a mobile site? They'll literally come to us and talk about, well, we already have a regular website. Can we build a mobile site because we're afraid that we're not addressing our mobile users. And I just start to ask them, and it's one more ball to juggle. This is one more thing for them to have to handle. And a lot of times what I've found is that they're not doing a good job of keeping up with their content with just one site. So now you're going to put 2 sites out there? Okay, how are you going to be consistent about the content that you're putting out? Are you going to strip it down? Because then the tendency is to, we got this mobile site. Well, we don't need everything on the mobile site because a mobile site's just, they're going to be on there for like 2 seconds. I would say that that is a terrible assumption. Karen McGrain had this quote that I love. She said that if somebody wants to do something on the internet, they will want to be able to do it on a mobile device, period. So, I think about that and I think, of course. I mean, people, I get on my phone all the time and I'm frustrated, from times as we all are, because not everybody is catering to us, but when they do a good job, it's like, oh, this is great. You know, I'm just coming over to Star Trek today, being able to pull up the site and find the address so I could punch it in my GPS was, you know, useful. And if it had been a terrible experience, oh gosh, maybe I need to go inside and look it up on my computer, I would have hated that. So that consistency is important. And that's the thing. So I don't think that users experience, I mean, you could ask the question, you know, maybe edge cases, maybe when it comes to an airline, the mobile site might just be like, you know, check flight times, check in, things like that. But I think that the majority of experiences, it's probably not. You're probably not going to want a different experience, or at least the experience should have the same consistent amount of content and be able to do the same things, even if it's formatted slightly differently. The other thing is that as people get into this, they say, okay, well, let's design a mobile design, and then we'll do a tablet design. Yeah, and you know, we'll be covered. And they sort of think of it as the design will like kind of, you know, solve this problem for us. But the problem is that it quickly becomes not sustainable, because you've got, you know, every device. There's now the iPad mini, and now, hey, the iPhone 6 is bigger than the old iPhone. And what if you're holding it portrait versus landscape? There's so many different, you know, screen resolutions that this is just not sustainable. So I would say, you know, really focus on the design should really kind of work its way around the content. The content itself should dictate where breakpoints happen, how things should get reformatted. And I think that that's something that, you know, as I talk later, you know, you'll see as to why that's important, because the mobile first stuff helps with that. And then the final one, and this is my favorite, is the retrofit. Can we just mobify our existing site? Can't we just make it responsive? I think that, you know, they kind of look at this as sort of, there's got to be some kind of, you know, duct tape, you know, thing that we can do, low-hanging fruit. I hate hearing that stuff, but, you know, at the end of the day, I understand where the impetus from that comes. It's like, well, come on, you've got HTML, you've got CSS, just swap some stuff out, and bam, you've got a site, right? Well, you know, in my experience, that's a really terrible thing to do for a lot of reasons. A site that was not designed to be responsive in the first place is going to take 2, 3, 5 times as long to optimize, because, you know, everything from not just the constructs of the HTML and the CSS, but the content itself, you know, it may not work. Often does not work. And so I'd say that, you know, rather than wasting your time and, you know, throwing good money after bad, just redesign from mobile first, because what will end up happening is everything will be much better for you. It also gives you a chance to kind of relook at your content, reconsider, you know, your architecture and your strategy for going to market with the stuff that you provide. So if somebody comes to you with any of those things, just don't do it. I mean, tell them it's not happening, because and for all the reasons that I gave. I mean, there's sound reasons. You know, if they don't listen to reason on it, I mean, I guess, you know, some people have to learn the hard way, but at least you can, you know, do your best to, you know, avoid those. Now, if you do get past that, which, you know, hopefully you do, I want to talk about some good practices, and I don't call them best practices, because over the years as I've been doing this, I found that something that used to work well suddenly just kind of becomes heavy-handed, or doesn't really work anymore. And that's kind of, you know, indicative of what happens with, you know, responsive design, is that this sort of emerged because, you know, suddenly we could get on the internet with our phones. We couldn't do that for a long time. It was just computers. So as the technological landscape changes, I think that these practices will change. But here's what's working for me right now. And I think that, you know, some form of this will continue to work for a long time, but it's just a way to kind of frame it. So the first thing about mobile first is really content first. And I think this is important because you don't really, it doesn't get the consideration that it needs a lot of times. I think you get lorem ipsum copy that goes onto a page, and we sort of kind of guess at what we're going to include. There isn't a lot of, you know, time that just stops and says, well, what are we actually going to do? Well, by doing content, what it does is it forces you to focus on what's important first. So this priority starts to take over, and you start to think, well, we really need to talk about our value proposition. We really need to immediately, you know, quickly convey to you know, somebody coming to our site, like, what we're about, what we do, what we sell, who we are, those kinds of things. And then everything else should start to, you know, kind of support that. A mobile layout is vertical by nature, and so I think that if you look at this and say, you know, how can we construct a narrative? If we can tell a story with our content, because guess what? People scroll, people are going to move on their phone. you need to give them a place to go, and you need to make them feel like they're making progress before they go to write you a call to action or to do something else. And so I think that the more that you can kind of tell a story with your content, or at least the structure of your content, the better off you'll be. And then what will happen is things will start to emerge. Elements and structures and style guides and all of these things that will then serve as tools for you to go forth and build later on. Brad Frost talks about this atomic design. I don't know if anybody's familiar with atomic design and his book on that. A few people, okay. Yeah, so what he talks about is that if you take things, there's like atoms, and there's molecules, and then there's organisms, and then there's page templates, you know. So his idea is that as you combine these things, and now you've got a link, and now you've got an input, and then now you've got a search box. So these things kind of combine together. The same kind of thing happens here with this content. You start to see like, oh, we're going to need one of these, we're going to need a sign-up form, and we're going to need a place to list our news and things like that. That stuff starts to emerge because you're thinking about your content. And it really gets to this order of importance. Now, the order of importance thing is something that I've struggled with over the years to find a good way, because it was always like, well, there's the required stuff and then there's everything else, or there's the required and then there's the wish list. Well, the way I like to look at it now is to say that everything should fall into one of three categories, or you don't need it. The first of these is the essential components. Okay, that's obvious. It's essential. And what is that? Well, that might be, you know, your product. It might be your, you know, your mission statement, your vision statement, whatever, your value prop, whatever you want to call it. The things that are essential to somebody being able to understand who you are, what you do, and what to do next. Those things are essential. You know, that's how you make money as a company. You need to have those things obviously on the site. And then there's things that are useful. Now, useful things are things that are, well, I guess not essential, but yet you want to have them there because they're assistive in some way. Navigation is useful. And you might say, well, it's essential. Well, yeah, it's essential, but it's only essential when you need it to get somewhere. Once you're there, it's just more useful because it's a tool for getting around. Search is useful, things like that. So you can kind of group these things and start to see, like, that's why the navigation is along the top or along the side, because it's not in the middle of the page. It's there as a thing for me to use, and it's constant. It's, you know, often global. And then the final thing would be something that's peripheral. So essential, useful, and peripheral. What's peripheral? Well, peripheral is something that supports anything on the page. And you could get rid of it and still be able to do most of anything you need to do. So it's not going to like compromise things, but it might add value. Now, if it doesn't add value, if it's not supporting something on the page, if it's just decoration, then get rid of it. If it doesn't fall into one of these three categories, you don't need it. So if you think about your content in those ways, that'll help you get to a good place to where you can start to, you know, kind of build out an architecture. This is where, you know, the sitemap comes in, and you start to think about, okay, how am I going to organize all this content? How am I going to come up with an information architecture that is both something that we can build today and is, you know, it'll expand and scale for tomorrow? The thing about it is, there's a lot, when it comes to sitemaps, they're not the most sexy user experience artifact, but they're so important, and part of the reason why is that they convey a lot of information in a small space. But traditionally, I feel like a lot of sitemaps have been sort of, they don't really have a lot of information because they just are like an inverted, bulleted list of, you know, hierarchical content, which is, you know, okay, I kind of get that, and that's helpful, but we could do so much more with it. Up here, I've got a legend, and then I've been refining this over the years, and what I've got here is this idea of strongly typed content. So as you're thinking about your content, you can kind of get an idea about what that content really is. This will really help, you know, provide direction around all kinds of stuff that will go past this. So if you look up here, the stuff that's on the left, this in the legend, these are basically like page states, okay? And you can combine any of those with any of the stuff on the right, which is page types. Now these are archetypes, they're very high level, but if you think about it, static content, so that's just content on a page. Forms. This is an important one because, you know, I will see, like, in a regular sitemap that's just black and white, contact us. And a developer will ask me, is there going to be a form on that page? You know, because now we have to worry about a database and some way to handle interaction, or is it just going to be an address with an email? That's kind of a big distinction. So, you know, you quickly like convey little bits of information like that by identifying that, oh, on the contact us page, oh, I can see it, that is going to be a form. Listing content, so any kind of news, blog post, search results, anything that needs to be put into a list and ordered that fits that. A landing or a section page might be a way of aggregating a lot of content on a page, sort of like a mini homepage within a site. The homepage itself often, actually always is kind of a section page. And structured content. So if you've got content that's coming from a CMS or a database, like if you think about like an event has a location, it's got a start date, an end date, it might have a short description, it might have a place to register, and all of this information is entered in somewhere and then rendered to the page. Well, when it's not just static content, but it has to be structured because we need to order or filter or do something else with it, that's when you talk about structured content. That, again, is an indicator that, hey, we've got some more complicated functionality. The non-navigable stuff just being like, okay, well, I want to represent this, like the thank you page that comes up after I fill out a form. You're not going to get to it in the navigation, but I still want to represent it to say like where it lives in the site. So that helps you identify elements and layout. I think you get the context. And then the thing about communicating features and functionality, this stuff is important because at the end of the day, this has got to be useful to everybody, not just you, not just you and the content person, but the developer, the stakeholder, everybody. And it's a living document. It should be updated all the time. And I'm going to show you an example of that a little bit later. So just talking about the toolbox first is that UIX, I don't know, UI, UX, IA, whatever, it's something. These are a lot of the tools that I use to do some of the work that goes into this. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is okay, sitemaps. Talking about that, the things that I use for this, there's a few of them that I think work well. There's OmniGraffle, which is great on the Mac. I highly suggest using that if you can, because it does a great job of allowing you to do a lot of those things. I'd like to put up into the GitHub repo after the talk some stuff about this so that we have the ability to, you can share this stuff and start to use them today. I'll try to get those up. I'll try to make a Visio one too. I've used Visio. I used to use Visio in the past. I don't really use it anymore, but it's essentially the same type of program for just kind of laying things out and creating, kind of these linked things. Wireframes. Now, I use Balsamiq for doing wireframes. There's a lot of tools that you could use. Mockingbird. There's, Glyphy. You could use even OmniGraffle and Visio. That a lot of people use them for that too. The reason why I use Balsamiq is that it works really well for me in keeping me in check. That I just kind of focus on what's important when it comes to some UI, content stuff. That you can't change your font. You're not going to be dealing with color too much. So it's very sketchy and it's cheap. It's like $40 or $60, something like that, and it's cross-platform. So you can build stuff out, and then I combine that with what I build out in OmniGraffle. Koniji makes this wireframe template that I've used for a while that allows me to kind of keep everything in one document, and I can update it. But I can pull in the stuff that I'm doing in Balsamiq to be able to show, okay, here's what the different kind of wireframes. I'll show a couple examples of those in a minute. And then prototypes. Now, there's Foundation, which is a responsive framework, is great for prototyping. It's got a lot of kind of pre-built patterns in its library. I mean, you could use Bootstrap, you could use others. We just have been using this a lot because it's built on Sass, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and we tend to use Sass in our shop. And Macaw, being that Macaw's got a lot of, this is like a lightweight kind of prototyping little design tool. You can drag things onto it, and it kicks out actually pretty good CSS and HTML so that you could put that up and interact with it in the browser. I think that these are important tools to use when you can, because it allows you to take a concept and put it out for evaluation before you go down the road of design or even to architect it beyond something. So if you've got something and you want to try it out, I think that's a good place to go. So consider doing that when you can. Now when it comes to sitemaps, here's an example of one page of a sitemap that I did recently. And it's a little bit hard to see, but you can tell, even though it's maybe a little bit hard to see and blurry, that there's elements on this page that you can identify if you remember the legend that I just shown. So the first thing here is that we've got static content, and you can tell that because it's gray. It's got the gray border on it, so that's easily identifiable. We've got these section landing pages. Again, they're kind of identified. Now, what I'm also doing here is I'm organizing the pages, but I'm showing a flow. Here's how people go from this page to that page. These like mini wireframes. I'm not saying that's exactly what it's going to be, but it evokes a little bit about what the page is you're expecting when you get there. There's syndicated content on the represented here, and we can see that's color-coded green, and you can see how the flow goes with that. and there's structured content. So this stuff is all represented here. So there's a lot of rich information in this small document. And if you take time to analyze it and look at it, if you're a developer or a content person, then you get a little bit more out of it. And again, it's a living document that can change and grow over time, but it really starts to help you visualize the path that people will take through your site. It's not just a bunch of hierarchical boxes. And then when it comes to doing the wireframes, I'm going to show you an example here of what I've done. So this is a wireframe that I did for a client that was mobile first. And the more I've done the mobile first stuff, the better it has. I had to do one a couple days ago, and I was under deadline because I was coming to this and I wanted to get it done. And I tell you what, you start off with the mobile experience first, and you solve so many problems before you ever get to the desktop that by the time you get to the larger layouts, it's just so much easier and better, and it looks better. Here, we have this really, complex About Us page that they wanted to, kind of display a bunch of stuff. So you've got stuff about the founders, this team of people they have, their location, how their product works, all of this stuff. But I think, you want to have contextual annotation in here with this stuff. Talk about why this is here, what it's for. This is important for lots of reasons. It's to remind you, it's to inform other stakeholders, developers, designers that are looking at this as to what's going on there so that they can interpret it. Without having to sort of extrapolate through their own considerations. If you're going to present these, you're obviously a mobile wireframe is real long and skinny. You can't just put it on a page. So you can break it up so that you can put it at a large screen and kind of show it side by side, put it into a document so that people can look at it. And then, adjust things for this vertical orientation. You've got a lot of stuff that you're going to be dealing with in a vertical space here, so make sure that it works well. Make sure that when you need to, provide navigation, collapsible content. Make content work for you. Make it accessible, but don't make it overwhelming. It's okay for people to scroll, but you don't want them to have a page that's 10,000 pixels wide or tall. But now you'll see that here, the same content. I haven't taken any content. I haven't removed anything. And at the desktop level, everything works just as well. It looks great. Now we've got white space and everything else, so we've got this nice progressive enhancement without compromise. It's not like the mobile part of this was an afterthought. It was the first thought. And so then this stuff ends up working way better. And I'll say that you solve these problems, and then all this stuff works in a way that I would say that if you don't do this, that you're going to get yourself into trouble because you start at the desktop level and I can't really fit that and that doesn't really work. You won't have that going the other way. I'll give you an example of where I did this before too. There was a timeline they wanted to have on this page. It showed all of the milestones of their company stacked up against all these milestones that were general internet milestones. And this was kind of hard because there was 2 columns, but I've only got this little space to work with. But what I did is I'd gone out and I looked around and found some different examples where people had done some things, and this guy on Behance had this really cool sort of where he kind of collapsed them together and brought all of the timeline so they kind of stacked on top of each other. And then they were just color-coded along with some information about what each one was. It suddenly works really well at this mobile level. And having the color codes and everything in there also helped people kind of quickly identify that, oh, this is their thing, this is our thing, and that was reinforced by the stuff that was at the top of the page there. And then at the desktop level, again, it expands out. We've got nice space to work with, and you can kind of see how this works. So we've got an experience that there is no compromise between the two. Something that I've recently done, and this is a layout where I'm putting in. I do three different layouts to kind of cornerstone a few of the major types to be able to show here's a comparison, a responsive comparison of this same design, so you could see everything side by side. Again, content is still the same, but here's how we're reformatting to make it work at these different levels. And this is, I think, hugely helpful because it can be pretty jarring to just see just a mobile wireframe first. You want to kind of show them the desktop first, even if you start with the mobile wireframe first. So hopefully you look at all that and you're like, okay, you've convinced me, I want to do this. But if you're going to do that, then it's like this is the lava challenge, by the way. Okay, the ground's going to turn to lava in 10 seconds. Everybody, feet up off the ground. So I'd like you to accept the challenge of doing that and try it out. But when you're done, I know that you're going to want to build this. Mark's here and somewhere in the audience. I was going to talk to you about this a little bit. Oh, there you are. Yeah. So here's some of the tools that I would advocate you'd want to take a look at. Sublime Text. You could use any text editor you want, but I find that Sublime is just a great tool. There's so many plugins for it. You can work with so many different kinds of code and platforms and everything, and its cross-platform support is great. So that's a great one for getting in and starting to edit and do your front-end coding with. There's also I would advocate that you use a CSS precompiler. Hopefully you're using these. We like to use Sass and Compass because it just compiles it right into CSS. And if you're using Sass, you can do so many things so much faster. You can put mix-ins, variables. It just does stuff that it would take a fraction of the time to write than if you'd had to write it all out in by hand for all the different browsers and everything else. So there's that, and I think that so if you've got those things, and that'll help speed up your build. Another thing that you want to consider is Grunt. Now, they even have support for Grunt now with Visual Studio, which is great. So you can run tasks, build scripts that push out your code. So whatever you're doing on the front end, look into Grunt, look into using this because you can literally put anything into it. I've got a task that will take after the build and pushes it out to an FTP server that puts it up on a site so that we can review it and be testing it. And I don't even have to get up and do anything. I just hit build and it takes care of it. And then the final thing would be just to make sure that you're using Git. How many people use Git here? Okay, good. That's great. Now, the thing about Git that is great for all those of you that haven't used it is like it's a giant undo button. As you're doing your work, you can go through, do a bunch of stuff, and if it doesn't work, you can reset and go back. You could branch, try stuff out, and if it doesn't work, just just revert back to your main branch. Or if it does work out and fold it in, there's this whole idea of what's called fork flow, and here it's like everything that you do, you create a branch, you work on it. And if you need to, you could jump back to the main branch. And then if you go out and you pull down, like let's say the latest version of something in a GitHub repo, some CSS framework, you can then pull that down, and then you can pull that into your main project, work off of it, and then as updates come to it, you can pull those down and merge them into your branch. So there's just a lot of power to what you can do with Git. There's a great site called planningforaliens.com that's got a nice little book on getting started with Git. If you don't need to, it doesn't go into depth, but just tells you enough and how to use it in a way that you can, again, a giant undo button. So those are some of the great tools for build. I also want to talk about some frameworks or kits that you can look at. I mentioned Foundation before. This is, I guess it's, again, there's Bootstrap, there's a bunch, pure CSS.io, whatever. But these frameworks, they give you a good starting place. We built a site that was responsive, a couple years ago, where we just built it by hand. We didn't use any framework. It took a long time. It was great and it worked really well. But essentially, all we were doing is we were building our own framework. So, I mean, if you've got one that's already there, get started with it, especially if this is your first time doing this stuff, because it'll kind of help you, get established. Foundation is great because they have a lot of design patterns right in their doc section of their website that you can look at and get ideas for how to use, certain types of navigation, how to use, different kinds of presentation for content, like in sliders and things like that. Also, HTML5 boilerplate. This is, obviously is kept up. Paul Irish does a great job, of making sure that, you've got everything from the includes for modernizer, making sure that you're starting off with a good semantic markup, providing touch icons for all these different devices. It's just a good starting point for things. So we actually will clone that in the repo and update it for each of our projects. And I'll talk about another tool that helps you spin that up real quick in a minute. And then responsive patterns is also, I think, a great place to go if you're trying to learn how to do something or you want to see like how's it been handled in the past. This is this one. Just going to show a few of them here. Brad Frost. He's got like, okay, so here we've got a sidebar, and as we come in, oh no, it folds underneath. It does a good job of showing like, well, here's how we can handle this content. So if you're not really sure like what is possible or how to handle something, this is a good place to go. And they've got everything. From like here we've got these accordions, I think, where he actually changes the order here, I think, at a certain point. Yeah, so there it goes and it drops to the bottom of the page. So reordering stuff in the you can do this, and they show you how to do it. So if you've got a challenge with some content, this is a good place to go and kind of get some inspiration for some of that. It goes on. I want to try to wrap up here pretty soon, so I'm skip past the rest of that video. And then the final thing is Yeoman. Yeoman is a great tool for starting your builds. If you use Yeoman, you can go out and pick what frameworks and what tools that you want to get started with, and it'll literally spin up a project for you and put it right in your build so that you can start within a matter of minutes working on a prototype or a site. So definitely get familiar with that. If you use any of these other tools, that'll be a lifesaver for you. And then the final thing is just testing. Testing is so important. Browser Stack is a great place to go so that you can see how your site's going to be looking across browsers and devices. I highly recommend taking a look at that when you're doing these designs. Also want to say that if you go and check out Modern IE, Microsoft put this out, and it's really great. There's a lot of great tools in this, and a lot of free tools too. For testing things, you can get virtual machines to try stuff out. There's a lot of that. And there's a tool, the Chrome Dev Tools. There's a lot of stuff that Chrome can do for you today. In fact, we actually build right within Chrome, where we actually build within the screen and then save and check our stuff into our repos as we're working through it. So, I mean, you can screencast, you can do all kinds of stuff with, you can do emulation, you can debug the canvas elements in it. It's great. And then web page test. This is something you should run your page through. So the performance thing I talked about before, you definitely want to use something like this to be able to see like how your pages, how your site's doing today. Benchmark it. Do it now. Then optimize. Whatever you can do to again shave off those seconds, shave off that time, you should be doing, and it's a great tool for that. And then the final thing I want to talk about is just insight and inspiration. There's a lot of what I do. I mean, I talked about the how, I talked about the why, but this is really the kinds of things where you need to be going and finding stuff. Get inspired. Look at each other's work, but look at the works of places like this. Smashing Magazine has great articles. They have articles that are well written, how-to, comparison articles about anything you might want to do. If you're considering using PhoneGap versus Xamarin versus some other tool, and they've got great articles that can help you, evaluate those things and learn about them. A list apart. Ethan Marcote's landmark paper on responsive design was put on a list apart. I go here all the time. They've got great articles, great thought leadership, and great authors on there. So definitely a place that there's a lot of inspiration to be found. Media queries. I think this is great. Media queries is great because they show like all these different responsive design implementations, and it's always new. It's every time you go, there's new sites that are being put on there. It's funny that we didn't start having non-responsive sites until we started putting fixed width layouts into our sites, using tables for layouts and things like that. This is the very first website ever on the internet, and as you can see, it is fully responsive. So, I rest my case. And the Behance, again, is a place. This is where I found that design pattern that fixed the timeline for me. There's all kinds of people out there like trying new things, doing new things, and they just put their work out for people to see, follow people, get out there and participate in it. It's a great site for that. And the awards site is great because here's where you can go in and look by industry. So a lot of you will be in a particular industry or working with a particular client in a particular industry. You can go and find the best e-commerce examples. You can go and find the best examples of blogs, of news and media sites, all kinds of stuff. They do a great job of curating that content and keeping it up to date. They do daily, weekly, monthly, and so that's great. So just to review, why responsive? Well, obviously, I think that there's plenty of information and literature out there that can tell you why. Take that to your boss, your stakeholders, and make sure that they understand that this is a good idea. If nothing else works, tell them about Google and Panda. It's coming out. They're going to start docking us if we don't have a responsive site for search, and that'll get them jumping. That's another one. Avoid the pitfalls. That's the first thing you want to do. Is once you get them established, avoid the pitfalls. Don't retrofit. Don't design for every screen. Make sure that as you go about this, that you're not going to fall into the traps that people would tend to, if they could say, okay, hey, can't we just do a mobile version of our site? No, just don't do those things. Get past that as soon as possible so that you can get to some good practices, the ones that I outlined. This whole talk will be up on the GitHub repo, so you can go back and review it at your leisure to kind of look at some of those things and bring your own to bear. Make sure you're stacking your toolbox with the things that you need to be able to pull these things off. There's lots of really great free tools, and I mentioned a lot of them. So find out what works for you, but make sure you get a good complement of them. Make sure that they work well together so that you can, as you go about your work, it makes things easier for you, and it's not just for doing the work, but for presenting the work, and then the builds and the testing and all that. It's all important because it has to be one part of one seamless ecosystem. And then, like I said, with the build, you've got, you want to make sure that those things kind of work in concert. Git is so huge, but everything else from, Yeoman and these tools that allow you to kind of spin things up quickly, make sure that you're doing that as well. And then finally, I think, we all are doing work like this, and we should all be borrowing and taking inspiration from each other. I love coming to conferences like this because it's a great time where I can talk to people and meet people, and then it expands that network, and I find out new things and new stuff that they're doing, and it just all enhances all of us. So go and get inspired by something. Get inspired by reading some blogs or going to some of these sites before you get started with your work. Do a little bit of research before you dive in, and I think that you'll find out that really helps. I don't know if I have any time for questions or how we're doing on time. Okay.
Just real quick, please don't block the exits. Don't stand in the aisles. Fire code reasons. There's lots of seats left in here. Just make sure when you go into a theater to find a seat.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions really quick, and then I want to tell a quick story, and then I want to give this book away. So if I don't know if you guys, is there a microphone or I can probably hear them. Just go ahead and shout it out. Anybody have any questions or comments on anything we talked about today? Anybody? Go ahead. Yes, and that's actually a great question. So there's different frameworks that you can use that you can componentize. I mentioned the pure CSS.io, or like I said, you could write your own stuff. I think it's a good place to get started. When you're looking to optimize, obviously there's a lot of different things you could do. From minification and gzipping, obviously you're going to want to do those things. But there's there's also things that are starting to emerge that just weren't available to us in the past. There's a couple of services. Encapsula and Cloudflare are two content delivery networks that are totally free. Well, at least they have a free tier that you can use today. So if you start to use tools like that, you can use that to help speed things up. You could also look at serving certain things up off of a subdomain. If you're combining your CSS into one file, there's a lot of that stuff that you can do. But you're going to get to a point where you can optimize as much as you can, and you just can't do any more. You can't make it any smaller than 100K or whatever it ends up being. But at that point, there's other things it's not the end of the road. Especially when you've got a rich content site, think about like how much stuff do I need to present first. So think about the way that your page is going to render. If a page is going to take 10 seconds to load, and the page is sitting there and nothing's happening, and then suddenly 10 seconds go by, maybe I've waited that long, and it appears, okay, now I can do what I want to do. Or maybe the page starts to load, and I see some content, and I'm starting to read it, and then the big banner image comes in, and it pushes everything out of the way, and I lose my place, and I'm scrolling all over them, what's going on? Or I'm on a site, and the page starts to load, I see the text, I start to read, the image loads in the background and fades in, content below the fold that is a little bit further down comes in, and all of those took 10 seconds. But the last instance, I would advocate is probably the best because you're not stopping somebody from getting started, and you're not forcing them to wait, and you're not interrupting their experience in the middle of it. So there's different ways that you can go about not just optimizing for just something like how do I minify all these things that I'm using because I'm bloating up my page, but also like how are you going about serving that stuff up? What is the order of those things? So, Yes.
So as a newcomer to basically mobile design and front-end design, can you give some reasons why someone would want to use less or SAS instead of less, or if they're so similar that it really doesn't matter?
You know, I would say that I wouldn't say that that you should. There's a big reason to use one over the other. You know, we looked at both, and I think we ended up with SAS because like we were using Compass, and it just had just a little bit more. I would say maybe kind of a beefier framework. And but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much. I mean, what really matters is that you're using one, because if you do, it'll speed up the whole process and make not just for better efficiency, but it also help you keep things organized, because you could write your stuff out, and then you don't have to worry about like how the CSS comes out, because it's more like code at that point, and you can think about structures. You can think about how am I going to reuse things. Can kind of componentize things, where you can define a color once, you can define a font once. Because otherwise, I mean, just regular CSS, I see it all the time where fonts just get tossed all over the place, and there's a thing that's going to slow your site down if you're using 15 fonts on your site instead of 2 or 3. So check them both out. That's what I would do.
Any tips for or any resources for design responsive applications that are data entry heavy?
Yeah, the responsive patterns site that I had up before, that was definitely one where I think you can go and, like, they have, all kinds of examples there. I think that when it comes to entry, I had a design challenge, recently where there was a client that they wanted to have a savings calculator on their website. And so, we kind of put it in, they put in like, here's what my average order value is, here's some, a few other things. But those values could be very widely. They could be, $100, they could be $100,000, whatever it might be. And so we ended up putting in this responsive slider so that you could, kind of adjust what that was. And, they interacted with it for the first time, and they're like, oh, I don't like this slider. It's, but we pointed out, we're like, yeah, but you can just type in what you want because you're on a desktop. But when you're on a mobile device, having to bring up a keyboard, is kind of like an extra step. So when you could find ways to, make the input a little bit easier, I think that's a good thing to do too. So, somebody over here. Any other questions? Oh, we got one up here.
How do you feel about the use of material design elements on the web right now?
Material design, or you mean like?
Like Angular has their material design library now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I would just be careful with those, because as long as it serves a purpose, most of the time when it comes to using something, whether it's a framework, a plugin, anything that's kind of predefined, that there should be that the reason for using it should originate from a need, from like an end goal that you're trying to get to. So I don't think that they're necessarily bad, but it shouldn't be something that you use as sort of a make the tool fit the solution kind of thing. Kind of make it be a little bit about the other way around. Anything else? Anybody else have any questions? Comments? Yes?
I'm curious what you use this for, because we've used it in the past, but it got kind of slow building SAS, so we moved to the C compiler.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious if you use it for like its mix-ins and stuff, or what?
Yeah, we used it for mix-ins for like when we defined like our style sheets for IE, because we were like separating stuff like that out, so that it would kick things out and do the includes correctly within the main SAS and then the CSS files for that. But you're right. I mean, at a certain point it does become it does get a little bit slow, and they're getting better with some of the newer tools like the C compiler that you're talking about. That is way faster. So again, that's why I'm saying good practices, not best practices. This stuff always evolves. Anyway, I see a hand over there. Any comments? Any thoughts in general? Where are we at here? Oh, okay. All right. Well, you know what? I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I also want to just tell a quick story. So, I heard this about this design, and this kind of like I think addressed a few of the things that I talked about, you know, as well as a few of the questions. But there was an airline that had all these complaints about their bags at the you know, waiting for people after they got off the plane. People complained that they had to wait too long. It's like a 15-minute wait, and it was terrible. And you know, and they're like, boy, we want to improve customer service. And so the airline did this study and figured, well, we can change this and we can make this more efficient. And they did all of this stuff to make it so that they could get the bags to the people faster. And they were able to bring it down to like around 8 minutes, which was almost half of as long as it had been in the past on average. And so you know, they put this new system in place. They zipped the bags over there, and people would get there, and you know, they went back to customer service and kind of looked and said, well, how are we doing? You know, we've done it. We put all this stuff in place. Has it helped stuff? Has it improved stuff? And what happened was they found that no, actually, there was no improvement in customer satisfaction. People were just as upset that they were having to wait. The fact that they got there and they were standing around for 8 minutes versus 15 didn't matter. The fact that they're waiting at all was really the thing that was driving for them. And then they're like, gosh, you know, what can we do? I mean, they really couldn't get any faster. So they were all sitting around. So then they hit upon this idea. They started to park the planes further away from the baggage claim. So now the plane would land, and everybody would get off, and they walk, and they get on the people mover, and they get to where they're going, and the bag would be waiting for them, and they're like, this is great. It still took 8 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it was, but suddenly people felt like they weren't waiting as long. So this is, you know, I think maybe a little kernel of what, you know, I've been talking about today is that, you know, wherever we can find ways to enhance somebody's experience, whether that's through, you know, deferred loading of content, of, you know, making, you know, the use of media queries is doing this to say, like, what do we really need to serve up, about being, you know, lean with our approach and saying, well, we only need, you know, this content on the page. This other stuff is just there for decoration. It doesn't serve a purpose. I think all of that stuff works towards making that experience better, to kind of, you know, hit upon ideas where you can say, you know, if we just move this stuff over here, it'll make things seem, you know, better, you know, for the user experience overall. You know, not just thinking about how do I make this like layout better within, you know, a mobile device, but how do I make this device, or how do I make our site performant? Because if it's really fast on a mobile device and then somebody uses it on a desktop, it's super quick there too. That enhances the desktop experience too. So again, I just thought I like that story because I think it kind of hits on that we should all be striving for these design patterns that, you know, sometimes we have to think, you know, in non-linear ways about how we can come up with some of these solutions. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go to my Twitter feed here real quick. I've got the book here.
If you're waiting on the next session, please don't block the exits.
Ooh. Okay. Do we have Samuel Ballinger's here? All right, come on down. Thanks again, everybody. Get you out there.